So the first thing that I wanted to ask you is, so I live in California, I've lived there for 10 years, and I've also lived in Florida for a long time. In California, when people talk about therapy, it's almost like they talk about it like it's working out, like, oh, I haven't done a session in 3 weeks, and so I'm kind of not in a good place, I need to, versus maybe like in Florida, people are more often like, if something's wrong, it's something used to. So the question I would ask, like to make it personalized, is like, when do I know that it's time for a session? Is it something that I do when I have a lingering problem that I can't deal with on my own, or is it something that I should do like regularly, almost like a checkup to make sure that I'm in good shape?
Yeah, so I believe that therapy should be accessible to everyone. I think it's important that just like how we're supposed to go for medical checkups every year, which a lot of people don't do, but it's recommended. I think that in the near future, it'll be the same thing with therapy. And a lot of people are already seeing it now, where when you even go to a regular doctor, they have a screening and it'll ask about like, symptoms such as anxiety, depression, if you felt any of those in the past 2 weeks, and you'll do the screening usually at your appointment, and then after someone will take a look at it and they'll discuss with you if it seems like your scores on there are somewhat concerning. The doctor or a nurse will speak to you about that. But I think that that's something that's new that they brought out in the past few years. I remember when I was first starting college, that's around the time, or even when I was in high school, around that time they started doing that, and now it's a lot more people are doing it. I think that therapy is something that it's a tool that can teach us skills that a lot of us didn't learn when we were younger, and emotional regulation, just coping skills to manage anxiety and building resilience. I'm even seeing with a lot of my clients that the younger kids in schools, they're teaching them these coping skills nowadays too. So I definitely think that it's come a long way since I was younger. And I think that in the near future, it's going to continue to improve. But to answer your question, I do think that everyone should have some type of checkup regarding their mental health regularly, maybe every year or so. And then regarding when you know that you need therapy, I think that's something it's important for the community to talk about, because people that are around you are able to tell what you're feeling like and the symptoms that come with a lot of the disorders. So if you're sleeping too much or not sleeping enough, if you're irritable out of nowhere, if you're crying all the time, those are all symptoms that something is off, and you might need a checkup and to see what's going on. And so there are very clear signs that come with mental health conditions and signs that you're struggling. I think a lot of it is just there's so much stigma around it, especially in our community, that people tend to ignore it or minimize it oftentimes.
You mentioned a couple keywords, depression and anxiety, which are like some of the big ones. Like, when you're at that stage, that's when it's really important to get a professional. But at least in my experience, I think I've experienced both of those. And in my experience, it feels like they blend, and sometimes they swing from one to the other.
Right.
And sometimes what you think is depression is really like, it could be something as like you had the wrong breakfast, you're listening to the wrong music, and it'll shift and you're like, wow, I actually feel good. Like, so how do I know anxiety? How do I know depression is happening?
Right. So it sounds like you've experienced anxiety and depression, and I'm sorry to hear that, you have familiarity with what that feels like. It sounds like for you, you've been able to find some tools that in those moments it helps you. And I guess what you're asking me is, how do you know it's something that's severe enough to go seek help?
Yeah, because somebody, the word like depression, like somebody, oh, you seem very depressed, or oh, I feel really anxious about if this is going to turn out good or not. And we'll use these words sort of interchangeably with things that maybe don't necessarily represent what the word means.
Right.
So when do I know like I have, let's say, full-blown anxiety or full-blown depression, for lack of a better word? Because I would be concerned like that it might get worse without mental health, right? Just like the wrong kind of injury in your ankle might get worse if you keep walking on it. So I'm curious, like, how do I know that it's time?
Yeah. So I would say, again, it's similar to medical issues where, if you're having medical symptoms, you want to get a checkup as soon as possible. If you are injured in some way, let's say like you fall down the stairs or something, even if you don't feel that much pain from it, you should still go get like, I don't know the right tools and tests for it, but it might be like a x-ray or something like that, and just to make sure that nothing else is going on. And that's a lot of times like that can be preventative, but also just making sure nothing's going on. And so in that sense, I would say same thing with therapy. If you feel like you're struggling a lot with specific symptoms over and over again, like if you're crying, once or twice a week and it seems like it's like blown out of proportion, like you're crying, like the reason that you're crying doesn't match up with like what's actually going on, that's when it's a cause for concern. And it might be that your system's overwhelmed or you're overly stressed out, and so you might need more coping skills, or you might even need to explore medication, or just finding a safe space to talk with someone about what's going on. So to answer that, I think everyone, as human beings, we all feel a wide range of emotions every single day. And that's something I explain to my clients, where they'll ask me, the little kids a lot of times will ask me, you don't ever feel angry, you don't know what this feels like. And I'm like, I feel angry all the time. And they don't believe me because they don't see me angry. And that's one of the things where, again, like, you have to learn coping skills for it, right? But also everyone feels those emotions. And I think even as a therapist, me being able to validate to the people that come in that it's not abnormal for you to be sad. It's not abnormal for you to feel unmotivated or angry or, whatever emotion that comes up for you. We're human beings. We're always going to feel emotions. The problem becomes when we're not able to either control the emotions or we let them overtake us, and then they're impacting our day-to-day life. So if you're crying all the time and, maybe you did go through something, but now you're crying all the time. If you're crying all the time, you're not going to be able to function the way that you need to in order to, go to work, go to school. And if you have a family, like if you're raising a family, you need to be able to find a way to feel better so that your emotions aren't carrying on into everything in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where a lot of people, again, like in our community, they can look at it as like people are just being dramatic, or they just need to go get over it, or they need to have stronger faith. But you can have strong faith and still be struggling.
That's a good point. And you mentioned therapy and medication. I'm curious, like, do you see them as like a fork in the road, like two separate routes, or is it something you sort of maybe you need to do two together? Like, what's your specialization? Why'd you choose that path?
Yeah, so I'm a therapist, and so my role in the mental health field is to do the therapy portion of it. And so a lot of times people don't know the difference between the different roles. So there's a therapist who does the therapy, and usually with a therapist you meet them frequently, usually every week, and then as you progress it'll change to bi-weekly, and then monthly is maintenance. And then with a psychologist, so a psychologist usually does testing, and that's their role. They can also do therapy, but their main thing that differentiates them from a therapist is that they do testing, which for different disorders it does require more formal testing, and that's like a long process a lot of times. So as a therapist, I don't do the actual testing. And then a lot of my clients, if they need like specific documents, like saying that they have either if it's like ADHD or autism spectrum disorder, or something that requires like an actual full evaluation, then I'll send them to a psychologist, and they'll just do the testing with them. They'll see that psychologist once or twice, and that's it. With me, they're continuing their weekly sessions and care. And then with a psychiatrist, the difference is that a psychiatrist does the medication portion. So a lot of my clients, if they need medication, then they will see a psychiatrist. And then same thing with a psychiatrist, you don't meet them frequently. You meet them more frequently than you would for testing with a psychologist. But with a psychiatrist, you would meet with them Probably every month in the beginning when you start the medication, and then if they become stable on the medication, then usually they can change the frequency maybe to every 2 months at that point.
Fair enough.
So it's different. There's different roles. As a therapist, I believe that it really does depend case by case. So all of my clients do not see all three professionals. A lot of them only see me, and they just need the therapy portion. But as a therapist, you also have to be aware when you're doing therapy, you're doing the talking part and you're working on solutions with the client, but there comes a point with a lot of my clients who have specific disorders where the therapy it reaches a point where it's not progressing anymore. It's kind of staying stagnant. And that's where I discuss with the client, or they'll come to me and they'll be like, well, I don't feel any better now. Like I feel stuck. I still feel the same right now. And that's when they're more open to talking about medication. And I always remind them, like with the medication portion, that they always have a lot of questions. And with the psychiatrist, usually they don't have long appointments with them. So I remind my clients that whatever concerns they have about the medication, those are things that we can also talk about together.
Right.
If they have a fear of medication, which a lot of them do, or if they feel like, what's going to happen, what are other people going to think about me, those are things that we work through in therapy, and we discuss how to either talk with their family members about it, or any other issues that might come up with that. But then a lot of times they're willing to consider the medication part, and then they'll see the psychiatrist, and as they begin the medication, usually what I see is they're very happy that they decided to go down that route.
Nice.
Even though in the beginning, almost always, they're very afraid of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you recommend people start with from the very beginning? First thing you want to do, maybe schedule a therapy call, and then let therapy guide you toward if you need something for example, my friend has a very young son who's high functioning autism spectrum. He's still nonverbal, but really good at solving puzzles and stuff. Somebody like him, should he just start, maybe do a therapy session and introduce his son to the therapist and then see where things develop from there? Or is it more with children, there's specific routes, with autism, there's specific routes? So I'm curious, what you think the journey begins and how it keeps going from there. Go ahead.
So I see children as young as 3 years old, and usually at that point, almost always they're referred by their doctor, or if they're a little older, if they're 4 years old, usually they're in preschool or kindergarten at that age, and so a lot of them get reports from the teacher that the kid is having certain symptoms. A lot of them will have behavioral issues, or they'll have attachment issues with the teacher or with the parents. They'll have meltdowns. So those are very clear signs that something is going on. And for a little context, I was a preschool teacher at one point as well. So when I was a preschool teacher, I noticed a lot of these symptoms in the kids as well. And it was easy to tell, okay, this person needs a referral.
Sure.
So a lot of times at that age, they're getting a referral from school, or from their pediatrician for when they go in for a checkup. And so at that point, at that young age, the parents are almost never wanting to do medication. So they come in for therapy, and usually they already have an idea of what's going on, because nowadays a lot of people have had diagnoses, the parents have had diagnoses, and things tend to run in the family. So usually they kind of have an idea of what's going on because they've experienced it themselves, or someone else close to them has. So we'll start with therapy, and for kids when they come in for therapy, I do play therapy and I do art therapy. So most of the kids don't know that.
What's that? What's play therapy?
Play therapy is exactly what it sounds like. They play games with me. So in my office, I have board games, I have toys, I have art supplies, and all different types of fun stuff. And so the kids come in and they don't know what therapy is at that age, which makes sense. I didn't know what therapy was at that age, but also because therapy wasn't popular back then. And they come in, and the parents usually tell them that they're going to meet their friend. They say that I'm their friend and that they're just going to play with me. And the kids are like, okay. So in the beginning, they're a little shy, but then I play with them a little, and we don't get into anything in the beginning. Like with the kids, I don't. With the parents, I talk with them about what's going on, and then I let the kids know that like the rest of the session, I'm just gonna play with them and get to know them. And I learn about, you know, what types of things they like to do. I ask them to show me what their favorite game is or to draw something for me. And usually the first couple of sessions with kids, you're building rapport, you're getting them comfortable with you. And it's just like with anyone, if you don't know the person, you're gonna feel like uncomfortable with them. And especially with kids, because kids don't know as many people yet, and you're a stranger to them. So I think it's really important when you're working with kids that you do have to have more of like a playful energy, and you have to be more like bubbly, because with kids they can also be very sensitive. And I've heard with some of my clients, like they took the kid to somewhere else and they did not like the person at all, because either they were like they were older and they were boring, or you know, they just didn't have fun. Felt like work. Yeah, they didn't have fun, and a kid is looking for fun. So that's why play therapy is the recommended main approach that you would use with kids. And so usually with kids, like I said, a lot of it is parents are involved in it. So the first session, I gather history and background information from the parents, and then the second half of the first session, I just play with the kid. We get to know each other. I always tell them they can ask me any question they want as long as it's appropriate, and they like that because they're getting to know me as well. And the kids always have a lot of questions. They're very nosy. So that's usually how the first session goes. And then after the first session with all clients, we make a treatment plan. So treatment plan consists of what the diagnosis is, and then what we're going to work on. So what interventions I'm going to use, and then what are the goals, and how are we going to achieve these goals. And so after that, the next few sessions, like I said, I get to build more rapport with the client and with the parents. And then usually with the kids, how the sessions go is every beginning of the session, so sessions are about an hour long, 50 minutes to an hour long. And in the beginning of every session, first 5 to 15 minutes, I always do a check-in with the parents. And the parents tell me what's been going on in the past week. They give me updates. If something big happened, if there's something I should focus on during the session, then the parents give me information about that. So I have an idea of what I need to work on with the client. And during that time, usually the kid is in the room. If it's something that they don't want the kid to hear, then we speak privately. But usually the kid is in the room during that time. And then about 30 to 35 minutes are spent with me and just the kid alone. And usually, like I said, we'll use the techniques like play therapy and art therapy, and I'll engage them. And again, they don't really know I'm doing therapy on them because we're having fun, and I'm sneaking in questions or techniques or coping skills with them while we're playing. And then at the end of the session, again, usually at the end of the session, it's like the last 10 or 15 minutes, I bring the parent back. Usually I have the child go and bring their parent. And we're all in the room together again, and then I have the child explain to the parent what we did during the session. And I do that to build the communication skills with the parents of the child, but also...
So it's like something they can take home with their kids.
Yes, and then also for autonomy, and for the child to be able to see that this is your time, and you're here, and you're going to tell your parents, like, what do we do today? Like, giving them that independence.
So, like, it's important that therapy empower them.
Yes, exactly. They don't look at it as, like, I'm being punished, or I was being bad, or I was having too many emotions, and so now I have to come to this place every week. I want it to be a place where they feel empowered, and they feel like, oh, I'm getting something good out of this, and also I get to teach my parents what I learned today. And a lot of times they'll tell their parents, like, the questions they ask me, they'll be like, did you know Ms. Z has this and does this and that?
So that's what I was going to ask you next, like, what kind of growth patterns do you see in, like, kids who stick with it, and, like, how does it compare to maybe adults who, you know, what kind of growth do you see in adults' emotional health?
Yeah. Well, to finish that part, so with the kids, like I said, it's usually a lot of parent involvement. Half of the session is with the parents, right? And so the kid is almost always in the room as well, so the kid's always there as well. And I always tell the children that, you know, the confidentiality, where you look at adults, obviously there's confidentiality there, but I also tell the parents the first session that children also need their privacy. And so if a child comes in and tells me, like, my mom was being so annoying today, I'm not going to go run and tell the mom that the child said that, unless the child wants to tell the mom or wants me to tell the mom. But that's building trust with the client, because if they tell me these things and then they feel like I'm snitching or I'm telling on them, they're not going to be open with me. They're not going to tell me anything anymore. And if I don't know what's going on with them, then I can't help. And the parents are always like glad with that. They're like, yeah, that's fine. Like, they can say whatever they want. We brought them here so that they can get their feelings out. And so I think, again, that's, for me at least, my approach with children. I always include the parents if they're under 18 and they're living at home. Not every therapist is like that. But for me, I tell the parents the first session that if they're not going to be involved in the treatment, then I'm not the right therapist for them, because I know that that's the best way to see improvement, is helping build the skills that the parents have as well, and then improving the communication. And there's so much research that supports that as well. So
that's like your contract with them, that if you meet me halfway, then this.
Yes.
So what would be the one with, like, for like adults, like an adult, like if you want to get this out of therapy, then this is what I need from you. And I know that a lot of therapists send their clients home with homework, like reading a book or so.
Yeah, so I'm very solution focused in my approach, and I do send homework for the kids as well. The kids, every client of mine gets homework, and I tell the kids in the first session, and they get scared at first. They're like, well, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, do you think I would make you do something that's like not fun or not helpful? And then they think about it and they're like, no, we had fun today. And I'm like, okay, so your homework's not going to be scary. Don't worry, this isn't school. And they actually get very frightened when I say the word homework at first. Adults get the same way too, because they're like, I'm not here for homework. But I explain to them that in order for things to change in your personal life, you can't just come to therapy every week. Even if you came every single day to therapy, if you don't change anything outside of that room, nothing's going to change. Your life is going to stay the same. You have to be able to apply the things that we talk about outside of the session. So when I give homework, it's not worksheets. I don't give like reading prompts. Unless the client asks and they tell me like that's something I need, then I'll tailor that to them. But typically, if I give homework, it'll be related to something they're struggling with, or something that they come in with and they're like, I need help with this. So for example, one of my clients recently, she's been trying to build better communication skills with when she's interacting with her parents, and she's Middle Eastern, and she says her family just doesn't understand boundaries at all. And so during our sessions, we talk about specific situations that happen, and when we're doing that, we do something called role play as well. So she'll kind of act out or explain to me what happened in a situation, and then we'll discuss, okay, well, what could you have done instead? And how would they have reacted if you did something differently? So we process it together, and then it gives her the ability to also, on her own, when she's on her own next time, she's able to replicate that and remember, okay, well, I did this in therapy, and this, like, I probably should have paused, and I should have said this instead. So next time she's able to do it differently. And so with that, I also give them, for example, like boundary scripts and things that they can practice with me. And then it'll make it easier for them when they're actually applying it. So then for that client, her homework has been, for a while, it's been to work on applying those boundaries with her family. So then the next session, she comes back and she has a story to tell me about, oh my gosh, I used what you told me and it actually worked. And I'm like, okay, tell me a little bit more about what you did and how do you know it worked? And so then she'll tell me, well, instead of, like, when my mom kept asking me over and over again why I'm doing this, I told her I'm just doing it and I have to go. I have something to do. And I left, and my mom, like, she dropped it. She didn't bring it up to me again. And so I'm like, okay, so, like, you know, she knows that it worked because her mom didn't keep asking her the same thing over and over again, where in the past, she would keep answering her mom's questions over and over again, and her mom would drag the conversation on. Right, and you'd be going in circles, right? And then now she's exhausted, her mom's exhausted, they're not happy with each other, and it's, you know, it's not beneficial to the client because it's causing her stress. But when she tried the tools that we worked on, and then she did the homework, which was very easy, it was just applying something we did in the session together. And that didn't take her any extra time. It actually saved her a few hours, right?
And probably some sweat and tears, yeah.
Exactly.
So is it fair to say that you should expect like visible results from therapy? It's not just all from within. You should actually see that your interactions with people get better, your communication with...
If you're going to the right therapist for your issues and for what you're hoping to get out of therapy, yes. And with my clients, I always tell them, because they tend to ask, and we're told we shouldn't give someone like an exact time frame ever of how long they need to be in therapy or how soon they should see improvement. But with my clients, I usually tell them that within a few sessions, if you're doing the things that you're supposed to and you're showing up, then you should start to see at least some difference to the point where you're like, okay, this is actually beneficial, right? And so that's where, again, it depends on what your intention is when you go into therapy. A lot of people go into therapy either, expecting something completely different, and that's why it's not as helpful for them, or they come into it and they're not fully ready to even share exactly what they're thinking or feeling. And if you're not open, then it's harder for you to find a solution, right? Because as a therapist, if you don't tell me everything that's going on, then I don't know the right thing. Exactly, I don't know what to help you with. And also clients that are very hesitant to try anything you recommend. Clients will come in and you'll ask them, well, have you tried this? And they're like, no, and that doesn't work. Or I did it once and it didn't work.
They're delegating.
And so you give them like 20 different tools and they say no to every single one of them. And then it's like, okay, well, if you're not open at all, and parents will do that a lot. The parents, a lot of times they'll be like, well, we do this, we're not changing this, we're doing the right thing. And it's like, okay, well, if it was working, then, you wouldn't be here asking for help right now. And so I think with that, a lot of times people can be closed-minded going into it, and then they get upset when they're not seeing improvement.
Got it.
But you have to be willing to work on things, and it doesn't happen overnight. Even if you do start to see improvement within a few sessions, you have to continue to show up, and you have to continue to apply those things, because the minute you stop applying them, I see it all the time, clients start to fall backwards. And it's because they're not continuing the things. Like if there's something we've worked on, boundaries, for example, you have to keep applying those forever, right? Because the minute you stop applying them and you go back to letting other people walk all over you or whatever is going on, you're going to feel the same way that you used to feel, right? So it's an ongoing process.
And speaking about boundaries and about lifestyle, the Islam part is the part that's going to be obviously like one of the more difficult to navigate. A lot of us some of us were born here, a lot of us were raised here, grew up here. So it's like, we understand that therapy is this practical thing, this approach that you can use, but also there's always going to be the feeling of, well, if you didn't, if you haven't prayed enough today, if you haven't done this, then how do you know that you're actually in a good spot? And if maybe you're the type that judges yourself pretty hard for falling behind religiously or not, feeling a certain way that other people may feel, how do you navigate that? Are there conflicts between therapy and Islam? Is there synergy? Do they work together? Is it something that's you keep them separate? How do you navigate those two dynamics?
I strongly believe that therapy and mental health and Islam and faith all go together. Islam encourages us to look after our mind and our soul and our heart, and it's very important for us to be able to process the things that, if something negative happens in our life, it's important for us to have a place to process that. And again, if we're experiencing negative symptoms that are impacting our life and our prayer and our responsibilities, then Allah would want us to find a way to feel better so that we can feel whole and good enough in order to be doing the things that we need to do. And so I think one common thing I see is that a lot of times people are made to feel guilty when they're not praying, if they're, I have one client who struggles a lot with her physical health, and it makes it hard for her to pray. And so with that, I constantly have to remind her about self-compassion, and that Allah's not looking at her and, like punishing her because she doesn't feel good enough to even get out of bed a lot of times. And some people in the faith can be so rigid and strict with things like that, where they're like, no matter what, you have to pray, and if you don't pray, like Allah's angry at you. And for someone who's already struggling, to tell them that a lot of times pushes them farther away, and it makes them feel worse. And so that's one of the main things I say is Allah teaches us compassion so much, in compassion and mercy constantly in the Quran. And in our faith and our community, it's not represented appropriately, and I think it makes it harder for a lot of people to get the help that they need. And again, when you look at Islam and you actually look at the Quran, it really emphasizes the importance of forgiving ourselves, and if we make a mistake, if we're sinning, if we're doing anything we're not supposed to, we should repent, we should seek guidance, and we should find a solution for things that we're struggling with. But a lot of times people in the community can be very judgmental, and they can start gossiping, backbiting, saying things about people. And a lot of my Muslim clients that come in and they have a lot of stories to tell me about things that other people have said about them and their faith, and things that have made them feel worse. And it's like, these people who are saying these things, they think that they're doing God's work and they're helping by nitpicking at what other people are doing, but in reality they're tearing someone's self-esteem apart so much that they're in pain, and they're coming to therapy to talk about what other people are saying about them, and it's impacted them so much.
In a way, there's sort of the need for therapy in the first place.
Exactly.
Well, but I am, Muslim who, I was not born in this country, but I grew up in Florida. Let's say, I don't really know how I feel about my mental health. I think I feel okay. I think, what's one takeaway you would want? And let's say I've never been to therapy. I'm kind of open to the idea. I'm kind of hesitant. It's not something I ever see myself doing. Like, what's one takeaway you would want for someone like me to have, so that if things ever get to a point, I reconsider this option with like a full sort of perspective?
What I would say to someone who has not been to therapy and is, maybe hesitant or is considering it at some point, is that therapy is a tool. I believe it is created by Allah. He gave it to us, just like He gave us, doctors and everything else that can help us feel better if we're sick or have a cold or anything like that. With mental health, the issue is it's not visible to other people, whereas physical illnesses a lot of times can be seen by other people, but mental health, you can only really see through the symptoms.
And it's really bad.
You can only see it through the emotional symptoms, right? And then people will find another way to label it, like, oh, they're being lazy, or they just don't want to do anything, or they, like excuses and things that people will say to minimize what someone is experiencing in the inside, because there's not really, at this point, there's not really like blood tests or things like that can prove like someone has something going on. So it's very easy for other people to be like, nothing's wrong with that person, they're just doing it for attention, or things like that. So what I would say is that the most important thing, if you are looking for therapy or mental health services at all, it's important to find someone who you feel like is a good fit for you. And I think that a lot of times, like being in Western society, it is hard for people to find someone who understands our religion and our culture, and especially to make it harder, there's not a lot of people from our culture and religion in the field either. And so a lot of that is hard, because then I've heard from people, they went to a professional, a therapist, who didn't understand the culture or religion at all, and the advice that they gave to the clients, or the tools or the things that they tried to help the client with, did not help at all, and a lot of times it made it worse because they were saying it from their own perspective, right? And there are so many layers to our culture and religion, and there's so many aspects of it in our daily lives, like the prayers, for example, where like for Muslims, that's a basic thing, right? Like we all know that we're supposed to pray. But if you speak about that to someone who's outside of the religion,
Right.
they're not going to understand that, and they're going to be like, oh, well, why is it that big of a deal, right? They'll be like, that doesn't even make sense.
Yeah,
Like,
or maybe stop
yeah.
praying for a while. See
Exactly.
What that does. Yeah.
So even if like the solution is that you need to not worry as much about it,
Right.
that's not the way to
They don't-
approach it. The approach would be, okay, this is something that's central to this person's upbringing and faith and religion, and so I need to incorporate it. So for me, with that client, how I would incorporate it is, okay, let's look at the Quran. What does Allah say about these
You have that
matters?
shared language with them.
Exactly. And what did the Prophet say about a situation like this? And then you incorporate that. But someone who doesn't have the knowledge of that,
Go to the
they're going to be
DSM,
like,
yeah.
well, it's not that big of a deal. Everyone, like, we're in America, no one prays, like, and you'll be
Yeah.
fine. Like, that's the type of stuff they'll hear
So
from
there's
someone. Yeah.
So I would take away there's a version of mental health practice that is tailored for me, the Muslim who is struggling with not struggling, but who's living a very unique life just as everybody else is. I'm not borrowing it from another culture and trying to like retrofit it into my world. There's a version of it that exists for my world. Is that
Yeah.
fair?
Definitely.
Amazing.
And I think that even with therapists who aren't Muslim or from the same background, I've met therapists where they're willing to be taught about it. So if you were to explain to them, well, this is what our faith says, this is the seriousness of it, and they're willing to incorporate that in the session, then that's good. And I have clients that are not Muslim, and I take their faith, whatever their beliefs are and their culture, and I apply it to their sessions. And I think that that's something that it's cultural competence, right? That's what it's called. But a lot of people have not learned that. And so I think that's where the advice I would give to Muslims going to therapy is when you go to find a therapist, make sure you ask them these types of questions and you let them know what's important to you. Like I ask all my clients when I first meet them on their intake form if they have any cultural beliefs that are important for me to like incorporate, if they have any specific spiritual beliefs, anything like that. And I ask that so that I know how to guide my sessions with them, right? But not every therapist does that, and not every therapist wants to do that, because in order to do that, you would have to be willing to learn about something that you don't know about. And not everyone wants to do that. And so it's important that you ask the therapist beforehand, because if you find out later that like they, don't know anything about your religion and you never mentioned to them like it was like a necessity that you need that incorporated, it can end up doing more damage than good.
So you don't need to have a therapist who's from your religion, but if religion is part of how you structure your life, then it's going to be a lot more work for a non-Muslim therapist to have to meet you there.
Yes, it
You'd
is
be
going to
better
be
off
more
starting.
work, but if you're looking for a specific specialty, for example, it would be better to do that and work with someone who's not Muslim if they specialize in what you need, rather than go to a Muslim person who knows nothing about it, right? Because it's easier for someone to learn a little bit about your culture and religion than for someone to learn about a whole new disorder, right? So that's what I would say. Because for me, I don't see all types of clients. I have a specific set of specialties, and I see the general issues, and then of course I see ADHD. That's, I would say, like my core specialty, and that's why a lot of my clients, they from different backgrounds, they come to me because it's hard to find someone who specializes in ADHD from their own background. So I'm willing to learn about their background, and I have groups of clients in the same background, so what I learn from one applies to several of them, right? But if someone came to me, for example, and they were having signs or symptoms of schizophrenia, I don't know much about schizophrenia at all, because that's not an area of expertise for me. And so even if they're Muslim and I'm Pakistani, if they're Muslim and Pakistani but they have schizophrenia, I would recommend that they find a therapist who specializes in schizophrenia, even if they're not Muslim or Pakistani, and if they're willing to incorporate their faith and their
Right,
culture,
right.
that therapist would be a better fit for them than me, even if I'm from the same background.
That problem supersedes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. That's awesome. I feel like I just had a session. That was great. Zaneb, thank you so much for your time. I'm really excited to introduce you to a lot of our community members who haven't met you yet. And hopefully they'll be seeing you in a session pretty soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yay, we did good. Let me drink some coffee. With that, well, I don't want it to be like
Let me
whatever I say. Don't yell at it. It's okay.
We didn't say anything. We didn't tell you. He's fired tomorrow.
Why do we yell at him?
He's done here. No, it's okay. I'm